Have you ever felt the weight of life pressing down on you, as if the darkness surrounding you was too overwhelming to escape? Have you questioned if the challenges you face have any meaning, or if they are simply obstacles designed to break you? Today, I want to tell you something that will shift your perspective forever. You are not alone in this struggle, and your challenges are not meaningless. They are part of a divine plan to prepare you for something extraordinary. I'm Luce, your guide on this journey of faith, transformation, and purpose. Today's message is not just another sermon, it's a wake-up call, a divine invitation to step into the fullness of the life God has designed for you. We are diving into a truth that many overlook: your trials are not signs of God's absence but evidence of His preparation. Like clay in the hands of a potter, you are being shaped, refined, and molded into a masterpiece that reflects His glory. In this sacred time together, we'll explore how the trials you face are opportunities for growth, how faith can be your guiding light in the darkest moments, and how God's justice and timing are always perfect. If you feel a stirring in your heart, a whisper urging you to rise above your circumstances, know this: it's not just your imagination, it's God calling you to more. Today, I challenge you to take the first step. Declare your readiness to embrace this transformation by typing "Amen" in the comments. Let it be your proclamation that you are prepared to step into God's plan and purpose for your life. Together, we'll uncover the power of faith, the beauty of waiting, and the promise that no matter how broken you feel, God's light is ready to shine through you. Beloved chosen ones, this is your time. The same God who raised Jesus from the dead is calling you to rise. Are you ready to answer that call? Let's begin this journey together. The best is yet to come. Life often feels like a battlefield, doesn't it? You stand there, facing the overwhelming giants of fear, doubt, and pain, wondering if you have the strength to endure. The storms rage, the waves crash, and the questions flood your mind: why me? Why now? What is the purpose of all this? But let me remind you of this eternal truth: your trials are not a sign of God's absence, they are a testament to His divine preparation. Think of Joseph, the dreamer in the Bible, who saw visions of greatness in his youth. Yet, his life took an unexpected turn. Betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit, Joseph's journey seemed like a series of tragedies. But God was not absent. In fact, He was orchestrating every step of Joseph's path, using each trial to prepare him for a destiny that would save nations. When Joseph stood before Pharaoh, elevated from the prison to the palace, he could look back and see that every moment of pain had a purpose. Your life is no different. The pain you are enduring, the struggles that seem unending, are not the end of your story. They are the refining fire that God is using to shape you into the person He created you to be. Like gold being purified, the heat of your trials is removing impurities, strengthening your spirit, and preparing you for the purpose God has placed within you. David, the shepherd boy who became a king, faced his own impossible challenge when he stood before Goliath. With no armor, no experience, and no physical advantage, David's only weapon was his faith in God. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty," 1 Samuel 17 verse 45. That faith turned a boy into a warrior, a shepherd into a king, and a moment of fear into a legacy of victory. The same God who empowered David stands with you today. Whatever giants you are facing, know that they are not too big for God. Even Jesus, the Son of God, faced trials that would break most of us. Betrayed by a friend, abandoned by His disciples, and crucified on a cross, it seemed as though all hope was lost. But those 3 days in the tomb were not the end, they were the beginning of the greatest victory in history. When Jesus rose, He not only conquered death but also opened the door for us to experience eternal life. His resurrection is a reminder that what looks like defeat in the eyes of the world is often the stage for God's greatest triumph. Have you ever considered that your trials are setting the stage for something greater? That the closed doors, the disappointments, and the setbacks are not there to break you but to prepare you? God sees the end from the beginning, and He knows exactly what you need to fulfill the purpose He has for your life. He is not punishing you, He is preparing you. He is strengthening your faith, deepening your trust, and equipping you with the tools you'll need for the journey ahead. The Bible is filled with stories of people who faced insurmountable odds but overcame through faith and perseverance. Esther, a young woman thrust into the role of queen, risked her life to save her people. Job, who lost everything, refused to curse God and was ultimately restored. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood firm in their faith, even when threatened with a fiery furnace, and God walked with them through the flames. These stories are not just historical accounts, they are living reminders that the same God who delivered them is working in your life today. So, what does this mean for you? It means that no matter how dark your circumstances may seem, there is hope. God is not finished with you. The trials you face are not a tomb, they are a womb, a place where new life and purpose are being birthed. You may feel buried, but in reality, you are being planted. And just as a seed must break apart before it can grow, so too must you endure the breaking before you can experience the breakthrough. Let me ask you, what would change if you started to see your trials not as obstacles but as opportunities? What if every closed door was a divine redirection, every disappointment a setup for something greater? God's perspective is higher than ours, and His plans are always for our good. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 reminds us, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Beloved chosen ones, this is your time. The giants you face, the battles you fight, and the challenges you endure are not the end. They are the beginning of a story that will glorify God and inspire others. Trust in His plan, lean into His promises, and know that the trials you face today are preparing you for the triumphs of tomorrow. God is with you, He is for you, and He is working all things together for your good. The question is, will you trust Him in the process? Will you let your trials become the foundation of your testimony? If your answer is yes, then get ready, your breakthrough is closer than you think. The best is yet to come. Faith is the anchor that holds us steady in life's storms, the light that pierces through even the darkest nights. Without faith, it's easy to feel lost, adrift in a sea of fear and uncertainty. But faith is not just wishful thinking, it is a divine gift that empowers us to move forward, even when the path ahead seems impossible. Faith is the hand we extend to God, trusting Him to guide us through the valleys and over the mountains, even when we can't see the way. Imagine Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples, stepping out of the boat into a raging sea. The waves were crashing, the wind was howling, and every rational thought told him to stay where it was safe. Yet Peter, with his eyes fixed on Jesus, took a step of faith onto the water. For a moment, he walked where no man had walked before. It wasn't his strength or skill that kept him afloat, it was his faith. And even when fear caused him to falter and sink, Jesus immediately reached out and caught him. This is the essence of faith, not the absence of fear, but the courage to step forward in the presence of it, knowing that God will catch you when you fall. Faith is not just for the good times, it is forged in the fire of trials. Think about the woman who had been suffering for 12 years, ostracized and hopeless. She had no wealth, no status, and no earthly reason to believe her situation could change. Yet, she clung to a simple yet profound belief: if I just touch His cloak, I will be healed. Matthew 9 verse 21. Her faith, small yet unwavering, drew the power of Jesus, and she was healed. Her story reminds us that faith doesn't have to be grand or perfect, it simply has to be real. But faith isn't always easy, is it? There are times when God feels silent, when the prayers we cry out seem to go unanswered. In those moments, it's tempting to believe that God has forgotten us. Yet, silence is not absence. Just as a seed grows in the quiet darkness of the soil, so too does our faith grow in the seasons of waiting. Consider Elijah, the prophet who called down fire from heaven yet found himself fleeing into the wilderness, overwhelmed and ready to give up. In his despair, Elijah encountered God, not in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in a gentle whisper. Faith listens for the whisper of God, even when the noise of life drowns out everything else. Faith is also a shield. Ephesians 6 verse 16 tells us to take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Think about that. Your faith is not just a passive belief, it is an active defense. It protects your heart from the lies of the enemy, from the doubts and fears that seek to tear you down. When the enemy whispers, "You're not good enough," faith declares, "I am fearfully and wonderfully made," Psalm 139 verse 14. When the enemy says, "You're alone," faith responds, "The Lord goes before me, He will never leave me nor forsake me," Deuteronomy 31 verse 8. Faith transforms how we see the world. Without it, trials look like obstacles, and delays feel like denials. But with faith, we see trials as opportunities for growth, and delays as seasons of preparation. Abraham waited decades for the promise of a son, trusting God even when the fulfillment seemed impossible. His faith was counted to him as righteousness, Genesis 15 verse 6. Joseph, too, endured years of hardship before stepping into his destiny. Their stories remind us that God's promises are always worth the wait, and His timing is always perfect. Let's be honest, waiting is hard. It tests the limits of our patience and exposes the fragility of our trust. But waiting is also where faith grows. It's where we learn to rely on God rather than our own understanding. Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6 encourages us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. Faith trusts that God's plans are good, even when we don't see the full picture. In your own life, where do you need faith right now? Is there a mountain that feels impossible to climb, a storm that feels too strong to endure? Whatever it is, know this: your faith, even if it's as small as a mustard seed, is enough. Jesus Himself said, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move." Nothing will be impossible for you, Matthew 17 verse 20. Your faith doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be placed in the One who is. Let me ask you, where is your faith anchored? Is it in the shifting sands of human understanding, or in the unchanging rock of God's promises? Faith anchored in God is faith that cannot be moved. It allows you to walk through the fire without being burned, to face giants with confidence, and to endure the storms of life with peace. Today, I encourage you to let your faith rise. Let it be the light that guides you, the shield that protects you, and the force that moves mountains in your life. God has not called you to live in fear or doubt, He has called you to live in victory. Trust in Him, and watch as your faith transforms your trials into testimonies. This is your time, beloved chosen ones. Step out of the boat, reach for His garment, and let your faith lead you into the fullness of His purpose. The best is yet to come. The Bible is a treasure trove of stories about ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things through faith. These stories are not just historical accounts, they are divine reminders of how God works through the trials of His chosen ones to reveal His glory. Their journeys of trust, perseverance, and courage serve as powerful examples for us as we navigate our own struggles. Take Joseph, for example. He was a young man with dreams of greatness, yet his life seemed to take a downward spiral from the very moment he shared his vision. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit, Joseph spent years in the darkness of prison. But even in the depths of despair, Joseph's faith in God never wavered. He trusted that God was at work, even when it seemed like everything was falling apart. And when the time was right, God elevated Joseph to a position of power, using him to save nations during a time of famine. Joseph's story reminds us that no matter how hopeless our circumstances may seem, God's plans are always greater than our pain. Then there is David, a shepherd boy who faced a giant named Goliath. To the world, David was an underdog, ill-equipped to fight a warrior of Goliath's stature. But David's faith in God was unshakable. He declared, You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. 1 Samuel 17 verse 45. With a single stone and unwavering trust in God, David defeated Goliath, proving that victory is not about the size of the battle but the strength of your faith. Like David, you may face giants in your life, giants of fear, doubt, or overwhelming circumstances. But remember, the God who empowered David is the same God who walks with you today. Consider Esther, a young Jewish woman who became queen in a foreign land. When her people were threatened with annihilation, Esther was faced with a choice: remain silent and protect herself or risk her life to speak up for her people. With courage and faith, she declared, "If I perish, I perish," Esther 4 verse 16, and she approached the king. God used Esther's bravery to save an entire nation. Her story teaches us that God often places us in positions of influence for a purpose greater than ourselves. Like Esther, you may feel unprepared or unworthy, but God equips those He calls. Your obedience and faith can have ripple effects that change lives. Job's story is another profound example of faith in the face of unimaginable suffering. Job lost everything: his wealth, his family, his health, yet he refused to curse God. Instead, he proclaimed, "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." Job 13 verse 15. Job's faith was not dependent on his circumstances but rooted in his unwavering trust in God's goodness and sovereignty. In the end, God restored Job's fortunes and blessed him abundantly. Job's story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, God is at work, and His restoration is always greater than our loss. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is yet another testament to the power of faith. When commanded to bow down to an idol or face death in a fiery furnace, these three young men stood firm in their faith, declaring, "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. But even if He does not, we want you to know, Your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods." Daniel 3 verses 17 to 18. Their faith was not contingent on the outcome but anchored in their trust in God. And God honored their faith by walking with them in the fire, delivering them unharmed. Their story teaches us that faith doesn't guarantee the absence of trials, but it does guarantee God's presence in the midst of them. These stories are not just ancient narratives, they are living reminders that the same God who worked through Joseph, David, Esther, Job, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is the God who works through you today. The trials you face are not meant to defeat you but to prepare you for something greater. God uses the brokenness of our lives as the foundation for His glory. Your pain is not pointless, your challenges are not random, and your struggles are not wasted. They are all part of a divine plan to shape you into the person God created you to be. Let me ask you, what story is God writing through your life? Are you in a season of waiting, like Joseph in the prison? Are you facing a giant, like David on the battlefield? Are you being called to take a bold step of faith, like Esther in the palace? Or are you walking through the fire, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Whatever your circumstances, know this: God is with you. He sees your struggle, He hears your prayers, and He is working all things together for your good. Your trials are not the end of your story, they are the beginning of something extraordinary. Just as Joseph's pit became the path to the palace, just as David's battlefield became the stage for his calling, and just as the fiery furnace became a testimony of God's power, your struggles are setting the stage for God's glory to be revealed in your life. Trust Him, lean into His promises, and let your faith guide you through every valley and storm. Today, I encourage you to reflect on these stories and let them inspire you. Let them remind you that you are not alone, that your struggles have purpose, and that your faith has the power to change everything. The same God who parted the Red Sea, who brought down the walls of Jericho, and who shut the mouths of lions is the God who walks with you now. Trust Him, and watch as He turns your trials into triumphs, your pain into purpose, and your faith into a testimony that will inspire generations to come. In the face of injustice, betrayal, and overwhelming opposition, it is natural to feel abandoned and powerless. But as God's chosen ones, we are not left to fight these battles on our own. Throughout history, God has demonstrated his unwavering justice and divine protection over his people, showing that no enemy is too great and no circumstance too dire for his intervention. His justice is not bound by human limitations, and his protection is steadfast, even in the most impossible situations. Think about the Israelites as they stood at the edge of the Red Sea. Behind them, Pharaoh's army was closing in, and in front of them was an impassable sea. To human eyes, their situation was hopeless, and fear gripped their hearts. But Moses, with unwavering confidence in God, declared, "The Lord will fight for you, you need only to be still." Exodus 14 verse 14. And with a miraculous display of his power, God parted the sea, creating a path of deliverance for his people and bringing destruction upon their enemies. This story is a powerful reminder that when we trust in God, he makes a way where there seems to be no way. In your own life, you may feel trapped, surrounded by circumstances that seem impossible to overcome. But the same God who parted the Red Sea for the Israelites is the God who walks with you today. His justice is not delayed, and his protection is not limited. Psalm 91 verse 4 assures us, "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge, his faithfulness will be your shield and rampart." This is the nature of our God, a protector who is both powerful and personal, who knows the details of your struggle and stands ready to fight on your behalf. Consider the walls of Jericho, a city fortified with thick, impenetrable walls that no human effort could bring down. Yet God instructed the Israelites to march around the city for 7 days, not with weapons of war, but with faith and obedience. On the 7th day, as they marched and shouted in unison, the walls came crashing down, not by human strength, but by the power of God. This miraculous victory reminds us that faith and obedience are the keys to unlocking God's justice in our lives. When you feel like the walls around you are too high, remember that no obstacle is too great for God to overcome. Now let's turn to the story of Daniel, who faced the ultimate test of loyalty when he was thrown into the lion's den for refusing to compromise his faith. To the world, it seemed like the end for Daniel, a man left to face certain death. But God had other plans. He shut the mouths of the lions, protecting Daniel and demonstrating his divine justice. Daniel's faith and courage were a testimony to the power of God, even in the face of death. Like Daniel, you may feel surrounded by forces that seek to harm or destroy you, but know this: God is your defender, and his justice will prevail in his perfect timing. God's justice often challenges human understanding because it operates on a higher plane. While we may desire immediate answers and swift resolution, God's justice unfolds in ways that are far-reaching and eternal. In the book of Habakkuk, the prophet wrestles with the question of why evil seems to prosper while the righteous suffer. God's response is profound, for the revelation awaits an appointed time, it speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it, it will certainly come and will not delay. Habakkuk 2 verse 3. This reminds us that God's timing is perfect, even when it feels slow to us. His justice is not delayed, it is deliberate. The ultimate act of divine justice and protection is found in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. On the cross, Jesus bore the weight of humanity's sin, taking on the injustice and pain of a broken world. To human eyes, his crucifixion seemed like a victory for evil. But 3 days later, the empty tomb revealed a greater truth: God's justice always prevails. Through Christ's resurrection, we are assured that no power, no sin, and no enemy can stand against God's plan for his chosen ones. The cross is a testament to the fact that even when it seems like all hope is lost, God is still at work, bringing redemption and victory. In your own life, you may be facing betrayal, rejection, or circumstances that feel deeply unfair. It's easy to feel forgotten or forsaken. But God's word promises us that his justice is sure. He sees every wrong, hears every cry, and will bring about his perfect judgment in his perfect time. Romans 8 verse 28 reminds us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Even the pain and injustice you face now are being woven into a greater plan for your good and his glory. So, how do we respond to God's justice and protection? First, we must trust him completely, even when we don't understand his ways. Trusting God means letting go of our desire to control the outcome and surrendering to his will. Second, we must remain faithful and obedient, just as the Israelites obeyed God's instructions to march around Jericho. Third, we must actively place our battles in God's hands, remembering that he fights for us. And finally, we must hold on to the hope that his justice is not just for the here and now but for eternity. Beloved chosen ones, let me ask you, where do you need to see God's justice in your life? What battles are you fighting that feel too great to bear? Will you trust that God is with you, that he sees your struggle, and that he is working all things for your good? His justice is not delayed, and his protection is unfailing. Whatever you face today, know that you are not alone. The same God who fought for his people throughout history is the God who fights for you now. Today, lay your burdens at his feet. Trust in his timing, his power, and his promises. Declare with faith that the same God who parted the Red Sea, brought down the walls of Jericho, and shut the mouths of lions is the God who walks with you. Let his justice and protection fill your heart with peace and your spirit with boldness. You are chosen, you are protected, and with God on your side, you are victorious. Waiting is one of the most difficult things we experience in life. It tests our patience, challenges our faith, and often leaves us questioning God's timing. Yet, waiting is not a punishment, it is a divine process of preparation. It is in the waiting that God does his most profound work in our lives, molding us, shaping us, and equipping us for the purpose he has planned. The waiting is not wasted, it is sacred ground where transformation takes place. Consider Abraham, who waited decades for the son God had promised him. Each year that passed must have felt like a lifetime, and yet Abraham held on to his faith. When Isaac was finally born, the joy of that promise fulfilled was far greater than the pain of the waiting. Abraham's story reminds us that God is never late. His timing is perfect, even when it feels delayed to us. The same is true for you. Whatever you are waiting for, a breakthrough, a restoration, a promise fulfilled, know that God's timing is not only perfect but also intentional. He is preparing you, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Joseph's life offers another powerful example of waiting with purpose. Sold into slavery by his brothers and imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, Joseph could have easily given up hope. But through those years of waiting, God was working behind the scenes, positioning Joseph to step into his destiny. When the time was right, Joseph was elevated to a position of authority where he saved not only his family but entire nations. Joseph's journey reminds us that waiting is often a season of preparation, where God refines our character and equips us for the calling ahead. Even Jesus embraced the power of waiting. Before he began his public ministry, he spent 40 days in the wilderness, fasting and praying. It was a time of preparation and communion with the Father. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus waited in anguish, surrendering his will to God's plan. His waiting was not passive, it was active trust in God's purpose, even when that purpose involved the cross. Jesus' example teaches us that waiting is not about doing nothing, it is about aligning our hearts with God's will and trusting his greater plan. In your own life, waiting may feel like a barren wasteland, a place where hope seems distant and prayers seem unanswered. But what if the waiting is where God is doing his deepest work in you? What if the delays are not denials but divine timing? The prophet Isaiah wrote, "But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength, they shall mount up with wings like eagles, they shall run and not be weary, they shall walk and not faint." Isaiah 40 verse 31. Waiting on God is not about passively enduring, it is about actively trusting him to renew your strength and guide your steps. Think about Elijah, who found himself alone and discouraged after his great victory on Mount Carmel. In his despair, he fled into the wilderness, convinced that his ministry was over. Yet it was in the stillness of the wilderness that God spoke to Elijah, not in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in a gentle whisper. Elijah's waiting was not the end of his story, it was a transition into a new chapter of his mission. Like Elijah, your waiting may feel like a wilderness, but it is in that stillness that God speaks and redirects you toward his purpose. Waiting also builds trust. It teaches us to rely on God rather than our own understanding. Proverbs 3 verses 5-6 reminds us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." Trusting God in the waiting means believing that he is good, even when circumstances are hard. It means holding on to his promises, even when the fulfillment seems far away. It means choosing faith over fear and hope over despair. The story of Noah illustrates this beautifully. Imagine building an ark for decades, enduring ridicule and doubt from those around you, all because of a promise from God that rain was coming. Noah's faith and obedience during the waiting not only saved his family but also became a testimony of God's faithfulness. What ark are you building in your waiting season? What step of obedience is God asking you to take, even if the promise feels far off? Waiting is not easy, but it is necessary. It is where God strengthens your faith, deepens your trust, and prepares you for the purpose he has ordained. Waiting refines us, teaching us patience, humility, and dependence on God. It reminds us that we are not in control, but we serve a God who is. And when the waiting is over, when the promise is fulfilled, the joy and purpose that come are far greater than anything we could imagine. Let me ask you, what are you waiting for? Is it a breakthrough in your career, a healing in your body, restoration in your relationships, or clarity in your calling? Whatever it is, know this, God has not forgotten you. He sees your struggles, hears your prayers, and knows the desires of your heart. He is faithful to fulfill his promises, but he also knows the right time, the right place, and the right way to bring them to pass. Today, I encourage you to embrace the waiting. Let go of the timeline you've set for yourself and trust in the timing of the one who knows the end from the beginning. Your waiting is not in vain. It is the soil in which God is planting seeds of faith, hope, and purpose. And when the time comes, those seeds will bear fruit in ways you cannot yet imagine. Beloved chosen ones, will you trust God in the waiting? Will you surrender your plans to his perfect will? Will you allow this season of waiting to be a time of growth, preparation, and transformation? If your heart says yes, declare it now. Type Amen as a sign of your faith and your willingness to trust him through every season. Remember, God's timing is perfect, his promises are sure, and his plan for you is good. The waiting is not the end, it's the beginning of something extraordinary. Trust him, and get ready to rise. Beloved chosen ones, as we bring this journey to a close, I want to remind you of a truth that echoes throughout history: God's timing is perfect, his promises are unshakable, and his love for you is eternal. Whatever season you are in, whether it's a time of waiting, a time of trials, or a time of triumph, know that God is working all things together for your good. The waiting is not wasted, the pain is not purposeless, and the challenges you face are not signs of defeat. They are stepping stones, carefully placed by the Creator, leading you into the fullness of his plan. Like Joseph in the pit, David on the battlefield, Esther in the palace, or Elijah in the wilderness, your story is part of something far greater than you can imagine. Your trials are not the end, they are the beginning of a testimony that will glorify God and inspire others. God is calling you to rise, to trust, and to walk boldly into the purpose he has designed for you. You are not alone on this journey. The same God who parted the Red Sea, who shut the mouths of lions, and who raised Jesus from the dead is the God who walks with you now. He fights for you, he protects you, and he equips you with everything you need to fulfill your calling. Today, I challenge you to take a step of faith. Let go of the fear, doubt, and uncertainty that have held you back. Surrender your plans to God and embrace his greater purpose for your life. Declare your trust in him by typing Amen in the comments, not as a simple word, but as a declaration of faith, a commitment to rise, and a testimony of your readiness to step into God's plan. Before you go, I invite you to join this community by subscribing to Word of God. Together, we will continue to explore the depths of God's love, uncover the truths of His Word, and walk in the light of His purpose. Share this message with someone who needs encouragement today, and let us grow together as a family of faith, united in hope and anchored in God's promises. Beloved, this is your moment. The trials you've faced, the waiting you've endured, and the faith you've held on to have led you to this point. The time to rise is now. The time to trust is now. The time to walk boldly in God's purpose is now. Go forth with courage, with faith, and with the unshakable knowledge that you are loved, chosen, and called by God. The best is yet to come. Rise, shine, and let His light guide your path.